I've always been a practical person, grounded in reality and skeptical of anything that couldn't be explained by science. That's why the events I experienced in my college dormitory remain so unnervingly perplexing. I'm sharing this story in the hope that someone out there can offer a logical explanation, though I haven't found one yet. It was a chilly September evening, the kind where the cold seems to seep into your bones, even through layers of clothing. I was a junior at this well-regarded university, and as usual, I was holed up in my dorm room, dormitory 207 on the second floor, preparing for my upcoming midterms. The building, like many old college dorms, had a bit of a reputation for being drafty and occasionally noisy due to its age, but nothing I couldn't handle. Around 11 p.m., I was deeply engrossed in my studies when I heard the faintest sound, a soft tapping noise, coming from the corridor outside my room. It was subtle at first, almost like someone trying to get my attention gently. I ignored it, figuring it was just another student coming back late, or perhaps maintenance work being done. The tapping persisted, growing more rhythmic and insistent. I finally got up to see what it was. The corridor was dimly lit, with only the emergency lights casting an eerie glow. As I walked down the hall, the tapping sound seemed to follow me, but no one was in sight. I reached the end of the corridor, where the sound abruptly stopped. I was about to turn back when I noticed something odd. A door at the far end of the hall, which was always closed and locked, was slightly ajar. My heart raced a little. I knew that this particular room was not in use and was generally considered off-limits for students. Curiosity got the better of me, and I approached the door. It was completely dark inside, and I couldn't see anything. I pushed the door open a bit more and peered in. The room was empty, save for a few dusty old pieces of furniture. Just as I was about to turn around and head back to my room, I heard a sudden loud bang from inside the room, like something heavy had fallen or been thrown. I jumped back, nearly stumbling over my own feet. The banging continued sporadically for a few moments before abruptly stopping. I hesitated, but eventually decided to investigate further. I entered the room cautiously. My flashlight beam flickered over the dust-covered furniture and old, unused items. Nothing seemed out of place. Then I noticed something peculiar. A series of scuff marks on the floor, leading from the center of the room to the wall. It was as if something heavy had been dragged across the floor. My pulse quickened as I followed the marks, only to find a large old trunk hidden behind a broken wardrobe. I approached the trunk and noticed it was locked. A shiver ran down my spine. The banging from earlier was starting to make sense now. I wanted to leave immediately, but felt compelled to open the trunk. I found a rusty key hanging on a nail nearby. With trembling hands, I unlocked the trunk and opened it. Inside, there were old papers, photographs, and a small, leather-bound journal. I quickly flipped through the journal. It was filled with handwritten notes, accounts of strange happenings, and distressing events that seemed to be from the late 1960s. Stories of students encountering inexplicable phenomena, unexplained noises, and odd occurrences that seemed to eerily mirror what I had just experienced. I never did find out what truly happened that night, or why the trunk was there. I left the room, locked it up, and quickly returned to my own dorm room, feeling a mix of fear and disbelief. I've never experienced anything like it since, but every time I pass that corridor, I can't help but glance nervously at that now locked door, wondering if the unsettling presence I felt that night will ever make itself known again. College is supposed to be the best years of your life, or so they say. For me, it was going just as expected. Late-night study sessions, a packed social calendar, and a manageable level of stress. But my perspective changed entirely after what happened one strange night in the hallway of the Humanities building. I was a junior, majoring in English, and I'd just wrapped up a group project with some classmates in the library. It was about 9 p.m., and campus was quieting down. I realized I'd forgotten my laptop charger in one of the study rooms in the old humanities building earlier that day. It was a bit out of the way and mostly deserted at night, but I needed my charger for the next day, so I decided to swing by and grab it before heading back to my dorm. The humanities building had always creeped me out a bit. It was one of the oldest buildings on campus, with narrow, dimly lit hallways and creaky wooden floors. By nightfall, the building felt even more eerie, with the flickering lights casting long shadows on the walls. I wasn't particularly scared, though. I'd been there plenty of times after dark and never had any issues. When I arrived, the building was almost entirely empty. I pushed open the heavy door, which groaned loudly, and stepped inside. The hallway was dim, with just a few lights on. The custodians were likely on another floor, as I didn't see or hear anyone around. I made my way down the hall, my footsteps echoing off the walls. About halfway to the study room, I passed by a classroom door that was slightly ajar. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed someone inside, just a quick glimpse of a guy sitting at one of the desks. His head was down, and he appeared to be hunched over, scribbling something in a notebook. It struck me as a little odd, since classes were long over for the day and most people didn't hang around in that building after dark. I slowed my pace, glancing into the room as I passed. The guy didn't look familiar, but I didn't think too much of it. Maybe he was just a fellow student who needed a quiet space to work, like me. I continued walking, found my charger in the study room, and began heading back toward the exit. As I passed the classroom again, the door was still ajar, but this time, I noticed something strange. The guy wasn't sitting there anymore. I hadn't heard him leave, but the room was completely empty now. The desk he'd been sitting at looked undisturbed, and there was no sign of anyone having been there at all. No open notebooks, no jacket or bag left behind. It was like he had never been there in the first place. I stopped in my tracks, a chill running down my spine. I double-checked the hallway, half expecting to see him walking ahead of me, but there was no one. The building was completely silent, save for the occasional creak of the old wood settling. I figured I must have just missed him leaving. Maybe he was quiet, and I wasn't paying enough attention. I shook off the unease and continued toward the exit. As I reached the stairwell, I heard something that made me freeze. A faint but distinct whisper, coming from down the hallway I had just walked through. It was so quiet that I could barely make it out, but it was unmistakable. My name. Someone had whispered my name clear as day from somewhere behind me. I spun around, heart pounding. The hallway was empty. The classroom doors were all closed now. The whisper came again, this time louder, but more insistent. "Emily!" My blood ran cold. I hadn't told anyone I was heading to this building. No one could have known I was here. I backed slowly toward the stairs, my eyes scanning every shadow in the hallway. I couldn't figure out where the voice was coming from, but it felt like it was surrounding me, closing in. Then, suddenly, footsteps. Quick, shuffling footsteps. Coming from the very same classroom where I'd seen the guy earlier. I bolted, rushing down the stairs, taking them two at a time. My heart was racing, adrenaline surging as I pushed through the exit doors and into the crisp night air. I paused outside, my breath heavy in the stillness. The building loomed behind me, silent and dark. I tried to rationalize what had just happened. Maybe I was hearing things. Maybe I'd imagined the footsteps and the whisper. But there was no mistaking that I had seen someone in that room, someone who seemed to vanish without a trace. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I mentioned the incident to a friend of mine who worked in campus security, hoping he'd offer some kind of explanation. What he told me only made things worse. According to him, about 10 years ago, there was a student who went missing, right in that same building. He'd been seen studying in one of the classrooms late at night, but when morning came, his friends reported him missing. No one could figure out what happened to him. His belongings were found untouched in the classroom, but he was gone, without a trace. They never found him. The description my friend gave of the missing student, it matched the guy I'd seen sitting in the classroom that night, almost perfectly. I haven't been back to the humanities building after dark since, and even though I try to forget about it, I sometimes wonder if that whisper was a warning, or a plea for help from someone who never made it out of that hallway.